The man from the Architectural Review Committee stood on Arthur Pendleton's lawn with the kind of polite, unshakable confidence that only a man armed with a clipboard and a three-ring binder of bylaws can possess. His name was Gerald, and his polo shirt, a crisp navy blue embroidered with the Sycamore Glen HOA logo, was tucked so tightly into his khaki shorts that it looked load-bearing. "So, you see, Mr. Pendleton," Gerald said, gesturing with a silver pen toward the row of rose bushes that bordered the property. "As per CC&R Section 8.4.2, the view corridor easement requires a 5-foot setback from the common area boundary to remain unimpeded. Unimpeded is the operative term here." Arthur looked from Gerald's earnest, sun-dusted face to the roses. They were Eleanor's roses, a mix of Queen Elizabeth pinks and Mr. Lincoln reds. They were unruly and glorious, a testament to his late wife's belief that nature should never be entirely tamed. He had spent the last 2 years learning their rhythms, their needs, their silent language. They were the last living thing her hands had touched with purpose. "This isn't an easement, Gerald," Arthur said, his voice quiet but level. He was a retired civil engineer, a man who had spent 40 years building bridges that spanned canyons and withstood 100-year floods. He understood boundaries, setbacks, and the legal weight of a properly recorded plat. "This is my private property. The property line is marked by the survey pin 2 inches this side of the sprinkler head." Gerald gave a patient, condescending smile. It was the smile of a kindergarten teacher explaining to a child why he can't eat paste. "I understand it can be confusing. We're not disputing your ownership. The HOA isn't claiming the land. We're simply enforcing the aesthetic covenants that apply to it. The view corridor is for the benefit of the entire community, to ensure a uniform and pleasing sightline along the community walking path." He pointed his pen toward a series of small orange flags that traced a line 5 feet deep into Arthur's property, a path that cut directly through the heart of Eleanor's garden. "The new wrought iron fence and paver walkway will be installed here," he continued, oblivious to the tightening in Arthur's chest. "So, we'll need these bushes removed by the end of the month. If not, the association can have them removed at the homeowner's expense, as outlined in the enforcement policy." The social humiliation was not loud or aggressive. It was procedural. It was the cold, quiet force of bureaucracy, the tyranny of a shared binder. Arthur felt the eyes of his neighbors. Mrs. Gable watering her petunias 2 houses down. Mr. Chen getting his mail across the street. He was being corrected in public, his stewardship of his own land being called into question by a man in a polo shirt. Arthur looked at the orange flags, then back at Gerald. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He simply drew a line, as clear and precise as any he had ever drawn on a blueprint. "This is private property," he repeated, the words solid and immovable. "The association has no authority here. You are not to touch these roses." Gerald's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He made a neat little check mark on a form on his clipboard. "Your non-compliance has been noted, Mr. Pendleton. You can expect to receive formal correspondence." He clicked his pen, turned with military precision, and walked back toward the pristine, HOA-maintained common area, leaving Arthur standing beside the orange flags that fluttered like tiny, cheerful wounds in his wife's garden. Arthur Pendleton lived his life by the principles of order and precision. His workshop, a converted garage behind his modest brick home, was a cathedral of meticulous organization. Tools hung on a pegboard in silhouetted outlines. Screws and bolts were sorted by size and thread count in small, neatly labeled drawers. For 40 years, he had designed systems that carried thousands of tons of steel and concrete over empty space, a job that left no room for ambiguity, A line on a map was a real, physical thing. A legal right-of-way was a documented, recorded fact. Feelings didn't hold up bridges, and vague interpretations didn't keep them from collapsing. His 46-acre property was the last remnant of the original Pendleton farm, a swath of rolling fields and old-growth oak that his grandfather had purchased in 1952. Over the decades, the city had crept outward, its suburban tendrils encircling his land until his farm was an island of rustic green in a sea of beige stucco. 10 years ago, the Sycamore Glen subdivision had sprung up on the adjacent parcel, a master-planned community of remarkable uniformity, governed by a homeowners association of remarkable zeal. Arthur had coexisted peacefully with them. He kept his fence line clear, his barn in good repair, and his tractor out of sight. He paid his property taxes and minded his business. But his property, with its untamed pasture and lack of manicured flower beds, was an affront to the carefully curated aesthetic of Sycamore Glen. It was a loose thread in their seamless suburban tapestry. At the center of that tapestry was Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was the two-term president of the Sycamore Glen HOA Board of Directors and the top-selling real estate agent in Dovebell County. She moved through the world with the brisk, predatory grace of a hawk, her smile as sharp and polished as her designer heels. To her, Arthur's property wasn't a family legacy. It was a blight. It was 46 acres of unrealized potential that was, in her professional opinion, suppressing the property values of the home she was trying to sell. Her newsletters, tucked into every Sycamore Glen mailbox, were peppered with phrases like community beautification, protecting our investment, and elevating our neighborhood profile. Her current obsession was the Perimeter Enhancement Project, a plan to install miles of ornamental wrought iron fencing and paver walkways around the entire subdivision. It was, she claimed, a matter of security and elegance. Arthur knew it was a matter of creating a more marketable product, and the 5-foot strip of his land, the strip that held Eleanor's garden, was the final, crucial piece of her grand design. He sat at the heavy oak desk his father had built, the same desk where he and Eleanor had paid their bills and planned their lives. He pulled out a fresh legal pad and a sharpened pencil. At the top of the page, he wrote Sycamore Glen, HOA versus E. Pendleton Rose Garden. He drew a neat line underneath. This was not a fight about land. It was a fight about a line Eleanor had chosen, a line where she had knelt in the dirt and coaxed life from the soil. Evelyn Reed saw a view corridor. Arthur saw a memory. And for a man who had built his life on respecting boundaries, this was one that could not be crossed. He opened his filing cabinet and retrieved the deed to his property and the county plat map. The paper was old, the lines slightly faded, but the boundary was clear. There was no mention of a view corridor easement, not a single word. He would fight this with facts, with documents, with the quiet, unyielding power of the truth. He had to, for Eleanor. On the afternoon of May 11th, the mail carrier's truck did something unusual. Instead of just sliding the mail through the slot in his door, the driver walked up the path and rang the bell. He held a clipboard and a pale green certified letter. "Need a signature for this one. Arthur, the carrier, a friendly man named Bill," said apologetically. Arthur's heart developed a low, steady thrum. He knew what it was. Certified mail was the first volley in any serious procedural war. It was a tool of intimidation, a way of saying, "This is official. We are documenting this. You cannot claim you didn't receive it." He signed his name on the electronic scanner, his hand perfectly steady. He thanked Bill, closed the door, and carried the letter to his desk. He didn't tear it open. Instead, He used a brass letter opener, slitting the envelope with a single, clean slice. Inside was a single sheet of heavy bond paper, bearing the Sycamore Glen HOA letterhead. The subject line was in bold, unforgiving type formal violation notice. CC&R Fargo 8.4.2. The letter was a masterwork of polite hostility. It referenced Gerald's courtesy visit on May 3rd and Arthur's stated refusal to comply. It formally cited a violation of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Specifically, Section 8.4.2, for maintaining an unapproved and impeding landscape installation within the designated community view corridor. The phrase as defined in CC&R Fargo 8.4.2 was highlighted, a subtle but clear emphasis on the source of their perceived authority. The notice demanded the complete removal of the offending shrubbery within 14 days. Failure to do so would result in the HOA contracting the removal services and billing the full cost, estimated at $1,500 to his account. A separate administrative fine of $250 would also be levied for continued non-compliance. At the bottom of the letter, below the crisp, digital signature of Evelyn Reed, was a tracking number for the certified mail, GER 719. Arthur placed the letter on his desk, aligning its edges perfectly with the corner of his blotter. This was no longer a disagreement with a man in a polo shirt. This was a formal, documented attack. Evelyn Reed had codified her threat, put it on paper, and created a record. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a new manila folder. With his label maker, he typed out HOA fence dispute. He placed the letter inside, along with its certified mail receipt. He then took out his legal pad. His first list had been about the principle of the thing. This new page was about action. 1. Photograph property line markers and garden dated. 2. Send formal response via certified mail disputing claim. 3. Obtain official, high-resolution copy of county plat map. 4. Review full text of CC&R 8.4.2. Evelyn Reed believed she was dealing with a stubborn old farmer who didn't understand the rules. She was about to find out she was dealing with a retired engineer who understood them better than she did. The theoretical had become real. The war of paperwork had begun. The Architectural Review Committee hearing was held on the evening of May 24th in the Sycamore Glen Community Center. A room with beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and the lingering scent of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Arthur arrived 10 minutes early, carrying a thin leather portfolio. He was the only person in the room not wearing something bearing the HOA logo. The committee consisted of 3 people sitting at a long folding table. Evelyn Reed was in the center, looking cool and impeccable in a cream-colored pantsuit. On her right was Gerald, the inspector, who avoided Arthur's gaze and shuffled his papers. On her left was a nervous-looking man who was introduced as David Chen, the board's treasurer. "Mr. Pendleton," Evelyn began, her voice smooth as polished marble. "Thank you for coming. We're here to discuss your non-compliance regarding the view corridor easement. We have your file, which indicates you have refused to remove the unapproved landscaping. Do you have anything to add before we proceed to a vote?" Her tone was dismissive, as if the outcome were a foregone conclusion. This wasn't a hearing. It was a formality. "I do," Arthur said, his voice calm and clear in the quiet room. He stood and opened his portfolio on the small lectern provided for residents. "First, I would like to enter into the record a copy of my property deed, which makes no mention of any such easement." He slid a document across the table. "Second," he continued, "I have here a printout of the official plat map from the Dove Bell County Recorder's Office. As you can see, the map clearly delineates my property line and shows no recorded encumbrances or easements for a view corridor in favor of the Sycamore Glen Association. He placed the blurry, hard-to-read map next to the deed. The area in question is, by every legal definition, my private property, over which the association has no jurisdiction. He had expected his evidence to make an impact, to force a discussion based on facts. He had underestimated Evelyn Reed's talent for strategic deftness. She glanced at the documents for less than a second before pushing them aside. "Thank you, Mr. Pendleton. However, this is not a legal proceeding about property lines. This is an ARC hearing about aesthetic compliance. Section 8.4.2 grants the board the authority to define and enforce standards within view corridors to protect community property values. Your personal property documents are not pertinent to the board's covenanted duty to maintain a uniform aesthetic." It was a brilliant, maddening piece of rhetorical jujitsu. She had taken his factual, legal argument and dismissed it as irrelevant to the more important, subjective issue of aesthetics. "The covenant can't grant you authority over land you don't own," Arthur countered, trying to keep the frustration from his voice. "The covenant was in place and recorded when you chose to live adjacent to this community," Evelyn retorted, her smile tightening. "Compliance isn't optional." David, the treasurer, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, looking down at his hands. Gerald continued to stare at his clipboard. It was clear who held the power. "The committee will now vote," Evelyn announced, "all in favor of upholding the violation notice and associated fines for Parcel 7B-43. Her hand shot up. Gerald's followed a moment later, his movements sluggish. David's hand remained on the table. Evelyn's voice was soft, but held a steely edge. David flinched. He glanced at Arthur, his expression a mixture of apology and fear, and then, slowly, reluctantly, raised his hand. "The motion carries," Evelyn declared, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. "Mr. Pendleton, you will be issued a fine of $250. You will also be billed $1,500 for the landscaping services required to bring your property into compliance. The work is scheduled for the first week of June. The hearing is adjourned." Arthur stood at the lectern, his evidence lying ignored on the table. He had come armed with logic and facts. Assuming they would be the currency of the discussion, he now understood that the only currency that mattered here was power, and he had none. He had lost the first battle. But as he packed his portfolio, a cold resolve settled over him. If logic wouldn't work, he would have to find a stronger weapon. The next morning, Arthur walked across his back field to the one house in the vicinity that predated the Sycamore Glen subdivision. It belonged to Sam Brewer, a retired history teacher who had lived there for 50 years. Sam was sitting on his porch swing, sipping iced tea and watching a pair of bluebirds at a feeder. "They railroaded you, didn't they?" Sam said, gesturing for Arthur to take a seat. He had heard about the hearing through the neighborhood grapevine. Arthur nodded, recounting the galling dismissal of his evidence. "She called my deed not pertinent," he said, the phrase still stinging with its sheer audacity. Sam took a long sip of his tea. "Arthur, you're trying to win a debate. Evelyn is fighting a war. You brought a textbook to a knife fight. This isn't about rules. It's about politics. She controls that board, and they'll rubber stamp anything she puts in front of them." "So, what do I do?" Arthur asked. "Let them tear out Eleanor's garden." "No," Sam said, leaning forward. "You stop playing their game and start playing your own. You're an engineer. You deal in precise measurements and verifiable data. Evelyn deals in perceptions and loopholes. You need to find a fact so hard, so undeniable, that even she can't spin her way around it. And you need someone who speaks that language." Sam paused. a thoughtful look on his face. "There's a young surveyor who did some work for my cousin last year. Sharp as a tack. Doesn't just use the old equipment. She uses satellite data, laser scanners, the whole 9 yards. Her name is Chloe Martinez." The name felt right. It sounded precise. Arthur found Martinez land, surveying in a small, modern office park on the other side of town. The office was bright and minimalist, a stark contrast to the dusty, paper-filled archives of the county recorder. Chloe Martinez was younger than he'd expected, perhaps in her early 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an energy that seemed to vibrate with efficiency. He laid out his situation, spreading his documents on her sleek conference table, the violation notice, the blurry plat map, his photos of the property line. She listened intently, her fingers tapping on her laptop. A view corridor easement, not recorded on the plat or the deed. She mused, a skeptical arch to her eyebrow. That's ambitious of them. An HOA covenant is a contract between the members, but it can't typically create an encumbrance on a non-member's property. It's like me signing a contract that says I can park in your garage. It's meaningless without your signature. "That's what I thought," Arthur said, a sliver of hope returning. "The first step is to eliminate all ambiguity," Chloe said, pulling up a satellite image of his property on a large monitor. "We'll do a full boundary survey, monument your property corners, and produce a new, certified survey map. It will be a legally unimpeachable document that shows your property line down to the fraction of an inch." "Good," Arthur said. "That's what I need." "But we shouldn't stop there," she added, her eyes gleaming with professional curiosity. "This feels like more than just a fence. I want to look into the HOA's own records. State law gives homeowners the right to inspect most association documents, including board meeting minutes. Your neighbor Sam is a member. Right. He can make the request. I want to see the minutes from the meeting where they approved this perimeter enhancement project. I want to see the vendor contract, the bids, the budget." She swiveled her chair to face him. "Mr. Pendleton, you're trying to prove where your land is. I think we also need to find out why they want it so badly." Arthur hired her on the spot. Chloe represented a new kind of weapon, not just facts, but expertly gathered and professionally presented facts. For the next week, she and her team were a quiet presence on his property, their high-tech transits and GPS rovers a stark contrast to the old farm landscape. While they worked, Arthur sent an email to Sam, who dutifully filed a formal records request with the Sycamore Glen Property Management Company for all documents related to the fence project. The clock was ticking toward the day the bulldozers were scheduled to arrive. But for the first time since the ordeal began, Arthur felt like he was no longer just defending. He was investigating. A week later, Arthur was back in Chloe Martinez's office, a large, freshly printed document spread across the conference table. It was the certified survey, a beautiful piece of work, crisp and clear, rendered with digital precision. It showed his property line exactly where he knew it was, with Eleanor's rose garden situated a full 7 feet inside his boundary. A bold, unequivocal note at the bottom read, "No evidence of a recorded view corridor. Easement or other encumbrance was found in the public records of Dove Bell County, affecting this boundary line." "This is your shield," Chloe said, tapping the document. "It's a legal fact. They can't argue with it." "It's perfect," Arthur said, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. This alone was worth every penny. "But this," Chloe said, turning her laptop toward him, "is your sword." On the screen was a PDF of the HOA board meeting, minutes from 3 months prior, the ones Sam had obtained. Most of it was mundane pool maintenance, complaints about garbage cans, a discussion about holiday decorations. But then she scrolled to Agenda Item 4, Approval of Perimeter Enhancement Project Contract. The minutes stated that the board had reviewed a proposal for the fence and walkway installation, after careful consideration of the presented bid. The text read, "The board votes to approve the contract." The vote was unanimous. But a crucial section was blacked out. The name of the winning contractor and the total contract amount were hidden behind thick, black redaction bars. The official reason, provided by the property manager, was vendor privacy and protection of proprietary financial information. Vendor privacy is not a valid reason to redact financials from members in this state, Chloe said, her voice tight with indignation. This is a deliberate attempt to hide something. So, I did some digging. She opened another window. State law requires most incorporated entities to list their officers with the Secretary of State. It's public record. So I looked up the board members. She pulled up the file for Evelyn Reed. Then she did another search. I started looking for landscaping and construction companies registered in this county with the last name Reed. And I found this. A business filing appeared on the screen. Reed Landscape and Design, LLC. It's a small, local outfit, Chloe explained. Not a big player. Definitely not the kind of company you'd expect to land a massive, subdivision-wide contract like this without a competitive bidding process. Is it a relative? Arthur asked, his stomach clenching. The registered agent and sole proprietor, Chloe said, clicking one more time to reveal the final piece of information, is a Mr. Daniel Reed. She paused for effect. He's Evelyn Reed's brother-in-law. Arthur stared at the screen. The entire conflict, the polite aggression, the weaponized bylaws, the dismissal of his rights, it all snapped into focus. This was never just about a uniform sightline or protecting property values. It was about money. It was about Evelyn using her position as board president to funnel a lucrative, no-bid contract to her own family. The redactions weren't to protect the vendor. They were to hide a blatant conflict of interest. She's not just overstepping her authority, Arthur said softly, the full weight of the discovery settling upon him. She's misappropriating HOA funds. Exactly, Chloe said. And we can prove it. State law also gives homeowners the right to request unredacted financial records under specific circumstances. Sam can file another, more forceful request, citing the statute on financial transparency and conflict of interest. They can try to stall, but they can't legally refuse. The fight had changed. It was no longer a defensive battle over a 5-foot strip of land. It had become an offensive campaign against corruption. Arthur now had the truth, and he had the evidence to prove it. Evelyn Reed felt the ground shifting beneath her. Arthur's polite but firm resistance, followed by Sam Brewer's formal records requests, had clearly unnerved her. She responded not by backing down, but by escalating. On June 7th, another certified letter arrived. This one was thicker, heavier, inside. Printed on the letterhead of the HOA's law firm was a document titled Notice of Intent to File a Line. The language was cold, brutal, and designed to inspire fear. It stated that due to his delinquent account, the unpaid fine and landscaping fee, the association would place a lien on his property if the balance was not paid within 30 days. A lien would cloud his title, make it impossible to sell or refinance, and could, if left unresolved, eventually lead to foreclosure. It was the HOA's nuclear option. The letter also announced a special executive hearing to be held in just 10 days, on June 17th, for the sole purpose of formally ratifying the board's decision to file the lien. It was a power play, a legal ambush designed to rush him, to force him into a mistake, to make him capitulate under the weight of the legal threat. The ticking clock was now deafening. 2 days later, Arthur's phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Pendleton," a tentative voice asked. "It's David Chen, the treasurer from the HOA board." Arthur was stunned into silence. "Please don't hang up," David said quickly, his voice strained. I can't talk for long. Can you meet me? The coffee shop by the library in 20 minutes. Arthur found David huddled in a corner booth. Nursing a cup of tea, he seemed to have no intention of drinking. He was an accountant by trade, a man of numbers and quiet order, and he looked utterly miserable. "I shouldn't be doing this," he began, wringing his hands. "But I had to warn you. What Evelyn is doing is wrong." "Then why do you keep voting with her?" Arthur asked, his voice more gentle than he intended. "I'm not a fighter. Mr. Pendleton," David confessed, his shoulders slumping. "She controls everything. The other board members, the management company. She has the votes for this lien, and she will use them. But it's more than that. She's preparing to smear you." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Smear me how?" "She's been going through the compliance records, looking for anything she can use against you or your allies. She's building a file. She told me she's prepared to paint you at the hearing as a disgruntled, rule-breaking property owner who is harassing the board as a negotiating tactic." David leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And she found something. It's small, but she'll use it. The Gables, 2 doors down from you. Their son put up a basketball hoop last month. The pole is gray, according to the ARC guidelines. All recreational poles have to be painted black. It's a ridiculous rule. No one cares. And Evelyn has ignored their courtesy notice for weeks. But she plans to bring it up if you cause trouble, to frame you as the leader of a rebellious faction and accuse you of selective outrage. She'll find the Gables and make it look like it's your fault. They're a nice family. They don't deserve to be dragged into this." Here it was, the secondary moral dilemma. Evelyn was holding an innocent family hostage. "Please," David pleaded, his eyes desperate. "Just compromise. Offer to move the roses back a few feet. Pay a smaller fine. If you go in there for an all-or-nothing fight, she'll turn it into a bloodbath, and other people will get hurt. It's not worth it." David's warning settled on Arthur like a shroud. He had spent weeks gathering his unimpeachable facts, preparing for a climactic battle of right versus wrong. Now, he was being told that a total victory might come at the cost of his neighbor's peace and finances. He left the coffee shop with a heavy heart, the certified survey and the unredacted minutes feeling less like winning weapons and more like triggers for mutually assured destruction. He had 10 days to decide what kind of man he was, a warrior who would win at any cost, or a neighbor who knew when to protect the innocent. The Sycamore Glen annual meeting was held in the local middle school auditorium, a larger venue to accommodate the higher-than-usual turnout. The air was thick with tension, and the scent of freshly popped popcorn from a concession stand in the lobby. Arthur had seen the flyers Evelyn had billed the meeting as a community vision update, promising exciting news about property values and new amenities. She was planning to use the public forum to solidify her power. Arthur had signed up for a 5-minute slot during the open forum, the period where residents could address the board. He sat in the 3rd row, his leather portfolio resting on his lap. Sam was beside him, giving him a reassuring nod. Across the aisle, he saw the Gable family, completely unaware they were a pawn in Evelyn's game. His conversation with David echoed in his mind. When his name was called, he walked to the podium at the side of the stage. The 5 board members sat at a long table in the center. Evelyn gave him a tight, dismissive smile. On a large screen behind her, a digital clock glowed with his allotted time, 5:00. "Good evening," Arthur began, his voice amplified slightly by the microphone. It was steady and calm. "My name is Arthur Pendleton. I live at the edge of the community, on the old Pendleton farm." He clicked a remote in his hand. The screen behind the board flickered from the HOA logo to a new image. 4:59. The image was a split screen. On the left was a high-resolution aerial photograph of his property line. On the right was the crisp, clean graphic of Chloe Martinez's certified land survey. A bright red line on both images marked the legal boundary. A blue dotted line showed the proposed location of the HOA's fence, 5 feet inside his property. The board has initiated a project that involves building a fence and walkway on what they refer to as a view corridor easement, as you can see from this certified survey. Filed with Dove Bell County last week. The project is planned entirely on my private property. A murmur rippled through the audience of nearly 100 homeowners. This was not about an unpaid fine. This was about the HOA building on a non-member's land. 3:30. The board has repeatedly cited Section 8.4.2 of the CC&Rs as their authority. Arthur continued. He clicked the remote again. The slide changed, showing the exact text of the bylaw. He had highlighted a key phrase: any fence, wall, or similar structure erected by a homeowner. He let the words hang in the air. This clause grants the ARC authority over structures built by homeowners. It grants no authority for the association itself to build on, or regulate landscaping on. Private property it does not own. The board has fundamentally misinterpreted the very document they claim to be enforcing. The murmurs grew louder. The property management representative, a man in an ill-fitting suit sitting at the end of the table, began looking visibly uncomfortable. Evelyn's smile was gone, replaced by a mask of rigid fury. 2:0. "So, why the urgency?" Arthur asked quietly. "Why the rush to enforce a non-existent rule and build on land they don't own?" He clicked the remote. The screen now showed 2 documents side by side. On the left, the redacted meeting minutes the HOA had provided. On the right, the unredacted version. The name Reed Landscape and Design, LLC, and the contract amount of $247,000 were circled in red. Gasps echoed through the auditorium. The company awarded this lucrative, no-bid contract is owned by the board president's brother-in-law, Arthur stated, his voice devoid of accusation, presenting it as simple fact. He glanced at the gables, at David's pained expression, and made his choice. He would not mention the basketball hoop. He would not stoop to her level. His case was strong enough on its own. And 0. He advanced to his final slide. It contained a single block of text. And finally, he said, his voice ringing with quiet authority, "I would like to read from our state's property code, Statute 209, HOA 52, regarding association records. An association's bylaws must specify that a board member is not entitled to vote on a matter in which the member has a conflict of interest." He looked directly at Evelyn. The clock on the screen ticked down the final seconds. He had said everything he needed to say. 003, 002, 001, 000. The clock beeped softly. His time was up. Arthur Pendleton nodded once to the audience, turned, and walked back to his seat. The sound of a stunned, deafening silence following him. The silence in the auditorium lasted for 3 full seconds, a vacuum of shock and disbelief. Then, the chaos began. It wasn't an angry mob, but something far more potent, a room full of concerned homeowners asking pointed, urgent questions. "Is this true?" a woman in the front row demanded, standing up to address the board. "Did you give a $250,000 contract to your family without a bid?" Evelyn, Before Evelyn could answer, the property management representative, Mr. Clark, scrambled to his own microphone. "I want to state for the record," he said, his voice quavering, "that our firm acts at the direction of the board. We advise the board that best practices recommend a competitive bidding process for all contracts over $10,000. The decision to waive this process was made solely by the board." He had thrown them under the bus to save his company. Evelyn, her face a pale, furious mask, tapped her own microphone. "This is an outrageous and defamatory presentation of—" She was cut off by another homeowner. "Defamatory. He showed the documents. Are they fake?" "Where did that money come from?" someone else shouted. "Was there a special assessment for this? I didn't know about." David Chen, the treasurer, looked as if he were about to be physically ill, but he leaned toward his microphone. "It was allocated from the reserve fund," he mumbled, his words barely audible. A wave of groans and angry shouts erupted from the audience. The reserve fund was for emergencies, a new roof for the community center, a major pipe break, not for cosmetic projects. Evelyn slammed her gavel on the table, but the sound was lost in the growing din. Her authority had evaporated in under 5 minutes. She looked at her fellow board members for support, but they stared down at the table, refusing to meet her gaze. They knew. They were complicit, and they were terrified. Sam leaned over to Arthur. "The king is dead," he whispered, a grim satisfaction in his voice. Finally, a man in the back stood up. He was a lawyer who lived on the next block. "I move for an immediate emergency executive session of the board," he called out. "And I further move that the board schedule a special meeting for the sole purpose of a vote of no confidence in President Reed." A chorus of second and I filled the room. Evelyn stood up so abruptly, her chair screeched against the stage floor. She gathered her papers with trembling hands, her composure utterly shattered. She glared out at the crowd, at the faces of the neighbors who had once admired and feared her. Then her eyes found Arthur. The hatred in her gaze was palpable. "My father always said that fence line was a mistake," she muttered, the words almost lost. A strange, cryptic admission of a deeper history. She then turned and stormed off the stage, disappearing through a side exit. The meeting dissolved. The board members huddled together, speaking in frantic whispers with Mr. Clark. Homeowners gathered in small, agitated groups, looking at Arthur with a mixture of awe and gratitude. He hadn't just defended his garden. He had exposed a rot at the heart of their community. As he packed his portfolio, Mrs. Gable came over and gave his arm a gentle squeeze. "Thank you," she said simply. He knew then he had made the right choice. The fallout was swift and decisive. Within a week, Arthur received a formal and deeply apologetic letter from the HOA's law firm. All violation notices, fines, and fees against him were rescinded. The notice of intent to lien was withdrawn. The perimeter enhancement project was canceled indefinitely. Evelyn Reed resigned as president and from the board of directors. Her letter, citing personal reasons, the threat of a recall vote, and a potential lawsuit from the homeowners for breach of fiduciary duty, had left her no other choice. Her real estate signs began disappearing from lawns around the neighborhood. An emergency board meeting was held, with David Chen now serving as interim president. Arthur attended, not as a protester, but as a partner. When they offered him a formal apology, he stopped them. "An apology isn't necessary," he said, addressing the humbled board. "Action is." He had spent the week thinking. He could have sued them for harassment and legal fees. He could have made their lives miserable. But that was Evelyn's way. Instead, he offered a solution. I am prepared to grant the Sycamore Glen Association a revocable license," he proposed. The board members exchanged confused glances. "It would allow you to plant and maintain a 1-foot-wide flower bed along our shared boundary line. It would formalize a beautiful, cooperative border, not a defensive wall." He paused, letting the offer sink in. "I will grant this license, at no cost, under 2 conditions. First, the board must commission a full, independent financial audit of the last 3 years of its operations. And second, you must work with a parliamentarian to rewrite the association's bylaws, to mandate a competitive bidding process for all contracts, and to establish a clear policy on conflicts of interest. The results of the audit and the new bylaws must be mailed to every single homeowner." He wasn't demanding punishment. He was demanding reform. He was turning his personal victory into a shield for the entire community, ensuring no future board president could wield power so irresponsibly. The board, cornered, grateful, and desperate to rebuild trust, agreed immediately and unanimously. After the meeting, as Arthur was walking home across the quiet, moonlit common area, David Chen jogged to catch up with him. "Arthur, wait," he said, slightly out of breath. "What you did, offering them that license after everything they put you through, it was incredibly gracious." "It's better to build a garden than a wall, David," Arthur said simply. "Eleanor would have liked that." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before David spoke again, his voice hesitant. "I found out something. About Evelyn. I think you deserve to know why she was so vindictive about that specific piece of land." Arthur stopped and turned to him. "I was talking to one of the older residents, someone who's been here since the beginning," David said. "He told me that back in the 70s, before Sycamore Glen was even planned. Evelyn's father, a small-time developer, tried to buy the 10-acre parcel that borders your property. He had a handshake deal to get it, but at the last minute, another buyer came in with a slightly higher all-cash offer and bought it out from under him. That buyer was your father." "The puzzle pieces of Evelyn's strange," muttered comment. "My father always said that fence line was a mistake, slid into place with sickening clarity. The land she was trying to take back with that fence," David continued. "It wasn't just about a view. It was the exact piece of land her family lost to your family 50 years ago. This was never about a contract kickback. Not really. That was just a bonus. For her. It was about reclaiming something. It was an old family grudge." Arthur looked out across his land, the dark silhouettes of the old oak trees stark against the star-dusted sky. He looked toward the house, where the lights were on, and toward the invisible line in the darkness where Eleanor's roses slept. He had thought he was fighting a battle over property rights and bylaws, then over corruption and money. But it had been something older and deeper all along. It was a story about family, about memory, and about the long shadows cast by lines drawn in the dirt generations ago. He had won, but the victory felt different now, heavier and more complex, tinged with a human sadness that no legal document could ever capture.